On May 17, 2026, the radar operator aboard an Arleigh Burke-class Flight 3 guided missile destroyer on blockade patrol in the Strait of Hormuz watched his tactical display do something that every U.S. Navy crew in this theater had been briefed about and trained for and hoped would never actually happen. The screen filled, not with one contact, not with a cluster, with dozens of simultaneous high-speed signatures appearing all at once across multiple bearing lines, converging inward from the cave inlets north of Bandar Abbas, from the shallow anchorages along Qeshm Island's northern coast, from the IRGC's sheltered fast attack positions that U.S. surveillance had been monitoring for weeks. 90 seconds. That was the margin between detection and the moment those vessels would be inside rocket range. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had activated Operation Hormuz Gatekeeper, not a harassment operation, not a probing maneuver, but the full activation of the asymmetric swarm doctrine Iran's naval planners had been designing and rehearsing for more than 2 decades. Fast attack boats at maximum speed, one-way attack drones launched simultaneously from coastal caves, smart mines that had been seated in the shipping lanes during preceding hours, Fajr 5 rocket batteries on the limestone cliffs of Qeshm, electronic warfare assets designed specifically to blind the Spy-6 radar and saturate the Aegis combat management system with engineered clutter. All of it converging on one ship. The Doctrine's architects had built it around a single proposition. You cannot defeat the United States Navy in a fair fight, but you can make the fight unfair in the other direction by forcing the most sophisticated warship ever built to manage more simultaneous threats than any crew can process without error. What Iran encountered instead was a fully integrated battle network where every platform shared a common tactical picture, every threat layer had a pre-planned response, and every element of the IRGC's doctrine was systematically defeated in the sequence most efficient for its destruction. Stay with Professor Evelyn Cross. Subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because what I am about to walk you through, minute by minute, from 2:47 a.m. to 4:41 a.m. on May 17th, is the most complete tactical analysis of this engagement available anywhere. This is not a summary. This is a dissection of how a doctrine 2 decades in the making failed at every layer it presented, and why that failure is permanent. That analysis starts right now. The IRGC's swarm doctrine was built on geography as much as on weapons. The Strait of Hormuz at its narrowest navigable point is barely 21 miles wide, with restricted depth constraining shipping lanes to corridors where a large warship's maneuvering room is measured in hundreds of meters rather than miles. The doctrine was designed for exactly that box, mines forcing speed reduction at the moment the swarm requires maximum evasion, drones consuming interceptors at the moment coastal batteries require suppression, electronic warfare degrading the sensor picture at the moment the combat management system needs it most. Every response to one threat creates exposure to another. The convergence was the weapon, and the IRGC had spent 20 years engineering it for these specific waters. The first asymmetric advantage of the engagement did not belong to Iran. It belonged to the intelligence architecture the United States had positioned before the first Iranian boat left its inlet. Operating at altitude above the strait was a Boeing P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, not simply a surveillance platform, but a networked node in the integrated battle network, continuously processing sensor data and distributing a unified tactical picture to every platform in the battle group via the Link 16 encrypted data link. The P-8A had deployed sonobuoys, recalibrated from their anti-submarine role to detect the acoustic signatures of high-speed patrol boat engines. The contact plot that emerged, positions, headings, speed estimates, formation geometry for every element of the approaching IRGC force, was transmitted in encrypted real-time to the destroyer's Combat Information Center. Simultaneously, an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter was scanning the water column beneath the shipping lanes for Moudge-class smart mines, bottom-anchored influence weapons that detonate on the acoustic signature or magnetic field of a passing vessel. At 3:01 a.m., what the U.S. Navy had was not a radar screen showing unknown contacts closing from multiple directions. It was a 3-dimensional real-time map of an attack in formation, surface threats, aerial preparation, subsurface hazards, all simultaneously visible. Iran's swarm doctrine was designed for a defender reacting to threats as they arrived at the engagement boundary. It encountered a defender that had been watching the entire attack architecture assemble before a single weapon was in range. At 3:08 a.m., the MH-60R Seahawk executed the first kinetic action of the engagement from 8 kilometers beyond the range of IRGC deck-mounted 12.7mm machine guns. 2 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, 49-kilogram precision-guided munitions with shaped charge warheads, struck the lead vessels of the IRGC formation. The command boats, the nodes through which tactical coordination and targeting data were flowing to the individual boat commanders, were destroyed. Without centralized command, the swarm's coherence began to degrade. Individual boat commanders trained to follow central direction rather than operate autonomously were now making independent navigation decisions in darkness without shared situational awareness. The IRGC's counter came at 3:14 a.m., and it demonstrated the sophistication built into the doctrine's resilience layer. Hundreds of Ababil decoy drones launched simultaneously from coastal caves, flooding the Spy-6 radar with false contacts. What had been a display of 50 identified threats expanded instantly to 500 flickering signatures. The Aegis target classification algorithms were processing deliberately engineered clutter, exactly the electronic environment the doctrine required. Simultaneously, Fajr 5 rocket launchers on the coastal cliffs fired into the water in a calculated grid pattern around the destroyer's position. Each impact generated a 15-meter column of white water and steam. Dozens of impacts in rapid succession created a continuous curtain of salt vapor, defeating infrared sensors and laser rangefinders simultaneously. Subscribe to Professor Evelyn Cross right now, because what I am about to show you is how the U.S. battle network dismantled each of these layers, the specific systems, the specific sequences, and the specific tactical decisions that turned Iran's most rehearsed scenario into a debris field. Hit that notification bell. At 3:26 a.m., the P-8A Poseidon, orbiting at altitude and immune to the surface-level interference the IRGC had generated, transmitted the active Fajr 5 battery coordinates via Link 16 to the destroyer's combat management system. Mark 41 vertical launch system cells opened. A coordinated salvo of precision-guided missiles struck the battery sites the moment their own radar emissions confirmed active targeting lock on U.S. vessels. Simultaneously, the destroyer's SLQ-32 electronic warfare system directed a concentrated high-power radio frequency emission against IRGC coastal radar networks, overwhelming their receivers and creating a blind corridor along the Iranian coastline. Into that corridor, 2 A-10C Thunderbolt II aircraft, forward deployed to Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, descended from altitude using the 150-meter limestone cliff faces along the Iranian coastline as terrain masking, flying at 30 meters above the wave tops to stay below the detection threshold of any surviving IRGC early warning radar. The A-10C's subsonic cruise speed of 300 knots is a tactical limitation in most modern air combat environments. In this engagement, with dozens of dispersed small surface contacts spread across miles of dark water, it was an asset. No supersonic fighter has the loiter endurance to work through individual boat contacts one by one without losing the tactical picture between engagements. The A-10C, combined with the Sniper Advanced Targeting Pod's electro-optical and infrared imaging, does. At 3:38 a.m., both aircraft stabilized on attack headings. The GAU-8 Avenger, 65 30mm depleted uranium penetrators per second from 7 rotating barrels, tracked through the dispersed IRGC boat formation. The sound of the Avenger is unlike any other aircraft weapon system, a sustained, low-frequency tearing that rolls across water and off cliff faces while the depleted uranium rounds work through aluminum hulls at hypersonic velocity. Behind each attacking run, oil slicks, burning wreckage, the cooling thermal signatures of destroyed engines on the dark Arabian Sea. At 3:46 a.m., the Seahawk crew broadcast emergency contact reports on the battle group's command net. Moudge smart mine signatures at precise coordinates directly across the destroyer's transit path. The Moudge is a bottom-laid influence mine responding to the acoustic signature or magnetic field of a passing vessel. Against a 9,000-ton destroyer at speed, a single detonation under the keel means catastrophic structural failure. The captain ordered emergency stop and hard starboard turn. The hull groaned under maximum rudder strain as 9,000 tons of momentum fought the course change. Mine cluster cleared, but the tactical consequence was immediate. The destroyer was now at reduced speed with limited maneuvering room, precisely the constrained mobility profile the second IRGC swarm wave had been timed to exploit. At 3:51 a.m., the Combat Information Center was managing the exact convergence geometry the Doctrine was built around. Mine threat requiring slow maneuvering on one axis, suicide boats requiring high-speed evasion on another, in direct operational contradiction. This was the trap. The moment where, in the Doctrine's design, the Defender's technological superiority became irrelevant because every available response to one threat created exposure to another. At 4:04 a.m., the captain authorized full-power electromagnetic sweep, not targeted jamming, but a high-intensity radio frequency emission covering all threat bearings simultaneously. The effect was total. Ababil drones maintaining attack geometry through GPS navigation and command link guidance lost both inputs simultaneously and dropped. IRGC boat navigation systems showed white noise. Command coordination, already degraded since the 3:08 a.m. Hellfire decapitation of the lead formation, collapsed entirely. Boat commanders without shared positional data in darkness made conflicting course corrections. Collisions occurred between vessels maneuvering blind in proximity to each other. The convergence that had made the swarm a coordinated asymmetric threat became a liability the moment the coordination network was severed. Without that network, the Doctrine was not an elegant asymmetric weapon. It was a collection of aluminum-hulled speedboats in the dark without direction. At 4:11 a.m., the Phalanx CIWS, a 20mm rotary cannon capable of 4,500 rounds per minute, operating on its own autonomous engagement radar without crew input, acquired the remaining contacts that had survived the electromagnetic sweep and were closing inside 1,500 meters. The Phalanx acquires, classifies, and fires autonomously within its preset parameters. It locked each closing contact in sequence and engaged. At 4:17 a.m., the Mark 45 5-inch naval gun fired proximity-fused airburst ammunition, rounds detonating 3 meters above the water surface, generating fragmentation cones covering the area beneath each detonation point. Against open-topped speedboats at close range, the airburst pattern is operationally conclusive. The Strait, which 90 minutes earlier had been filled with the radar signatures of a coordinated multi-layer attack, was a debris field. At 4:28 a.m., the engagement's character shifted from defense to deliberate retaliation. The P-8A Poseidon had been building a secondary targeting picture throughout the engagement. The IRGC infrastructure embedded in the Qeshm Island coastline, missile bunkers carved into limestone cliffs, boat shelters cut into coastal rock, fuel and ammunition storage embedded in the island's terrain. Coordinates were transmitted to the A-10s, which carried GBU-12 Paveway II laser-guided bombs, designated in real time by the Poseidon's own laser targeting system. At 4:41 a.m., the bombs struck cave entrance structures with the precision that laser designation produces. Entrances collapsed inward. Secondary explosions propagated through internal fuel and ammunition storage. Thousands of tons of limestone came down on whatever remained of the IRGC's coastal reserve capacity. The Hormuz Gatekeeper operation was over. The destroyer that had been its primary target advanced into the main shipping lane, asserting uncontested freedom of navigation. Behind it, oil slicks, collapsed bunkers, and the cooling wreckage of a doctrine that had been decades in the making and 2 hours in the unmaking. Here is the strategic verdict this engagement makes unavoidable, stated with the clarity May 17 demands. Iran's swarm doctrine was built on a foundational assumption. Simultaneous convergence of multiple threat types across multiple vectors would overwhelm American technological capacity to manage all of them in real time. That assumption was structurally wrong. Not because of poor IRGC execution, not because of exceptional American improvisation, but because of the Link 16 integrated battle network architecture that gave every platform a common three-dimensional tactical picture from the moment the first IRGC boat left its inlet. The P-8A Poseidon provided sensor coverage immune to every surface-level interference measure the IRGC generated. Pre-planned response packages for each threat layer enabled immediate coordinated action rather than reactive decision-making under fire. The doctrine assumed a defender seeing threats arrive at the engagement boundary and responding to them individually. It encountered a defender that had been watching the entire attack architecture assemble before a single weapon was in range, and had pre-positioned the correct response for each layer before the engagement began. That mismatch is not correctable through tactical adaptation. It is structural. The sensor and data fusion gap between the IRGC's command architecture and the U.S. integrated battle network cannot be closed through operational creativity. It is the product of decades of systems integration investment that cannot be replicated by a force operating within the IRGC's resource and organizational constraints. Iran did not merely lose a naval engagement on May 17th. It lost the operational validation of the deterrence architecture its entire Hormuz strategy was built upon. The credible threat to close the Strait, Tehran's leverage over global energy markets and American strategic calculations for 4 decades, was predicated on the belief that the swarm doctrine could impose unacceptable costs on U.S. Navy forces in the Strait's confined geography. That predicate is gone. A doctrine that fails completely in its full operational activation is not a deterrent. It is a historical record. The IRGC chose open kinetic aggression, the one scenario where American technological integration produces its maximum operational advantage, over the patient, covert attrition of sustained mine-laying and incremental harassment that might have extended Tehran's strategic runway by weeks. In doing so, it gave the U.S. Navy a defined target set, clear engagement authority, and the opportunity to demonstrate in full public view exactly what the integrated battle network does to a swarm in the Strait of Hormuz. The debris field at dawn is the answer. The B-1 Lancers remain at RAF Fairford. The carrier strike groups remain on station. The targeting infrastructure that has been systematically dismantling Iran's coastal warfare architecture since March 17th is fully operational and continuously updated. Tehran's options for imposing costs on American naval operations in the Strait have been reduced to a single remaining question: whether the Iranian civilian leadership can make an accurate assessment of a military reality the IRGC has been preventing it from seeing clearly. The engagement record of this conflict is the evidence. The debris field off Qeshm Island this morning is the latest entry in that record. And it will not be the last until Tehran makes the only decision the arithmetic of this conflict has left available to it. Subscribe to Professor Evelyn Cross right now because we are tracking every development in this escalation with the tactical and strategic depth you will not find anywhere else. Hit the notification bell so you are there the moment we publish. And drop it in the comments. Is Iran's swarm doctrine permanently finished as a credible threat against the U.S. integrated battle network? Or does the IRGC have an adaptation that the Link 16 architecture cannot yet answer? Tell me, because this conversation matters and I read every single one.